right, so I think we're all here. Nice small meeting. The secretary has agreed to come and meet with us all,
Happy to do so.
and we appreciate that very much, and we appreciate your efforts as well to help make this happen for us. We'll go around the room and introduce ourselves.
Yvonne Danduran, Select Board, Franklin.
Josh Thurrock, Select Board, Highgate.
Randy Conley, Select Board for Highgate.
Steve Scott, Highgate Elementary School Board.
Devin Batchelder, Franklin School Board.
Peter Magnet, Franklin Select Board.
Dustin Degree, Governor's Office, proud Franklin County resident.
Steve LaFar, Selectman from Highgate.
Dan French, Secretary of Education.
I'm Chris Shepard, I'm on the Highgate School Board.
Ethan Latour, also with the Governor's Office.
And I'm Sharon Boscat, the chairman of the Highgate Select Board. So, can you start for us, Mr. French, and tell us why Act 46 is so important to the Department of Education?
Oh,
Why
yeah.
does the Department of Education think this is a good idea?
Yeah. That's, how much time do we have? How many hours? Just by way of introduction, you guys know I've been secretary for about a week now. Just to give you just a little background, I was a principal and superintendent up in Canaan for about 15 years in Northeast Canaan. Then I moved down to Manchester, Vermont, where I was superintendent for about 9 years, and that's where I still live. And for the last 2 years, I've been working at St. Mike's College, where I used to run the graduate leadership program. Also during the 2-year period, I did a lot of consulting statewide. Probably in the first year of my 2 years of consulting, the first year was on Act 46 stuff. I would say I still was doing consulting relative to Act 46, but it was mostly about districts that had already merged, and they were trying to get some help to figure out what can we do after merging. So, in summary, about 19 years as an educational leader in the state of Vermont. And I think, my impression on Act 46 isn't so much the agency of education that's important to us, but it's the law. Why is it important to the state? I think if you go back and look at starting with Act 153, which was 2010, I believe, that was voluntary mergers, if you remember that at all. Only one district in the state did it. It was one of mine. Actually, it was one of my neighbors. They decided to merge it, but then they wanted to join our supervisory and as a way of preserving school choice. So their voters were actually adamant that they wouldn't merge their districts unless they could come into our supervisory union. So basically, Act 153, wasn't overly successful, shall we say? And while this is starting in 2010 anyway, that's really when, in my impression, the bottom started to fall out the number of students we have statewide. So we have, as you know, a per pupil funding system. So with Act 68, people are generally spending more. We've lost some of that local control of containing costs. At the same time, the bottom starts to drop out in the number of students, which exacerbated the impact on our taxes statewide. So I think firstly the financial scenario was pretty significant, and the legislation and our legislators were increasingly concerned that we had to do something about that, and I'm not sure we've quite got our arms around that yet. But the other thing we started to notice too was that, particularly with small high schools that were right next to larger high schools, that they weren't able to really offer the same kinds of opportunities. So one of the things we started to notice was this sort of equity issue, particularly on the high school level, that small high schools were really having trouble. And I was quoted in the paper the other day. When I started, I was principal at Canaan from 1997 to 2004, which is a pre-K through 12 school. We had about 340 students when I started. I went to silence that. Today they have 200 students. And they've had to really adjust on how they operate because of that. They've partnered with schools in New Hampshire. Some of the high schools in New Hampshire actually field teams together with them because they've had no choice but to deal with that. So I think it's been a real issue, and particularly the rural areas that I'm more familiar with in the kingdom, they've struggled to do that. But I think mostly at the high school level, that's where I've noticed real opportunity issues. So I think, the inability of districts to kind of voluntarily do this, the increasing fiscal pressures on the system, and then the equity piece, the legislature was kind of working on that the year before. And then, you know, all this sort of came together in sort of a perfect storm, if you will. So I think Act 46, the way I look at it, starting with Act 153, Act 153 was like voluntary. Act 156, which came out in 2013, was sort of created some other options for people to merge, and then Act 46 is now, you know, what we're dealing with, which is a less than voluntary approach. You know, basically, Act 46 passed in 2015, gives you 2 years to kind of work out something with your neighbors, and now, of course, as you know, we're down to the rub where the state board has some authority to create a statewide plan and force people to merge. So, in short, I think, you know, the fiscal pressures and the need to have better outcomes for kids statewide is what's really launched down this path.
So I'm not sure if you're familiar with our setup, but we had a quasi-merger
Yeah,
in the 70s when we created Missisquoi Valley Union,
yeah,
which sent our children,
right.
Highgate, Franklin, Swanton, and Sheldon was a tuition school that also, you know, had students in
Right.
that system. So we feel like,
We did our part.
Yeah.
well, to be quite frank, yeah, that we've been doing this system.
Yeah,
And that our supervisory union has been sharing resources. That we've been doing the things that Act 46 meant to provide for students. But for us, what happens with Act 46 is you have an inequity of control. Right now, the way Missisquoi Valley Union was set up, there are 3 representatives from each town.
okay,
So each town has an equal say in what happens to that school.
yeah,
In the way the system is designed now, it'll be 1 representative for Franklin, 2 for Highgate, but 4 for Swan.
when you say the way it's designed now, where does that,
If you do your representation per student.
Per student.
well, you
Yeah.
don't have to do that.
Well, and
That's
that's,
Yeah.
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 Well,
Yeah.
our high school board is set up at voting at large, and we have a gentleman's agreement at this point
Oh.
that we have 3 from each town to represent
Yeah.
the high school. And obviously, we would like to do the same agreement, but that is, at the end of the day, just an agreement. We don't have any control to say, concrete and stone, that Highgate, Franklin will have an equal representation on this board.
Yeah.
Act 46 specifically calls for proportional representation.
No, it doesn't. So, Act 40, you know, just so we can get down in the weeds, I'm happy to go into
Yes,
detail
yeah.
on this stuff. But firstly, Act 46 really doesn't describe how you merge, you know? When you formed a union high school in the 70s?
Yeah, 70s.
Yeah, a lot of people around the state did that, you know, because the state was encouraging high schools to kind of come together, and there was a lot of money put on the table for you to do that. The law that we use to form those union high schools, we call 706, Title 16 706, is the same law we use today to merge under Act 46, okay? So Act 46 basically says if you're gonna do this merger thing, go ahead and pick up 706 and follow the process. It's an important distinction because the 706 statute was written in a totally different time. You know, it was written in a time when most people were like happy to come together and build a high school together, and, you know, everyone saw the value of doing that because it was hard to run small high schools. And the state was giving out lots of money to do it. But we use the same process, which is the 706 process, okay? So one of the items, if you follow that through, we can talk about the 7, you guys didn't do a 706 study or form it, I'm pretty sure you didn't do that.
No, we did
Yeah.
our own independent.
Yeah, so if you would walk through those, so there's 14 questions basically, and number 14 is, are there other things you want to talk about? But the one thing you have to figure out in there is how you're going to configure representation, okay? And that's sugars off in 1 of 2 ways. And you can go on the website and pull down all the other merger reports, you know, that people have done for examples. There's 2 ways you do it. And the theory here is you got to have, you can't violate the constitutional idea of 1 person, 1 vote. Okay? So the sort of the simple way to do that is 1 person, 1 vote. And that ends up, you know, proportionally with some issues. We call that the proportional way of doing things. So in mergers or communities, and I've done enough of these where you have, it's not unusual in Vermont to have like 1 huge big town and then lots of small towns. In that kind of scenario, the proportional generally doesn't work that well. So there's what the AOE puts out, it's called the hybrid model, and you can find the guidance from the AOI on this. It talks about the difference between the proportional and the hybrid model. the hybrid model, basically what you do is you figure out just kind of what you've done, you say from gentleman's agreement, but you would figure out how the board will be configured. The law says you can't have more than 18 on the board, 18 members, but it could be less than 18. But then you figure out how many people should come from each town. But in order to satisfy the one person, one vote, every single voter in the entire combined electorate has to elect all the members to that board, okay? So for instance, I did a merger in my hometown with Taconic, and what's now called Taconic and Green, where Manchester is by far and away the biggest town in that district. In the small towns, there's no way we're gonna let Manchester have a supermajority, you know? So what they came up with was equal representation, you know, so every board, I think, was guaranteed 2 people. And then there were at-large members of the biggest 3 towns, so Manchester, Dorset, and Londonderry were each guaranteed at least 3 more slots, but they had to be voted among those guys. But so each town was allocated slots, but every single voter in the entire district elects all those people. So for instance, in that scenario, if you were from the small town of Rupert and you wanted to get on the ballot to be elected as one of the Rupert reps to that, you would have to be a resident of Rupert and you would go to your town clerk in Rupert to get on the ballot. But when that election was held, everyone would vote for you. Manchester, Dorset, everyone would vote for your spot. Okay, so that's the hybrid model.
Okay.
So it's sort of like you can configure the board differently to address this very issue, but everyone gets to vote on it, not just your town.
And that's what we do for our high school now.
Yeah, so that's you know, once again, the rules that you use to create that are the same rules that are used for Act 46 mergers.
Does the current setup of 3 from each town satisfy the one person, one vote?
Yeah, it could be anything you want as long as there's not more than 18. What satisfies the one man or one person, one vote is that everyone needs to vote on it. So you can't have like, say Franklin was guaranteed 3 slots on this new board. Franklin voters aren't the only people that elect the Franklin representatives. But only a Franklin representative could file for a petition to be on that ballot. You know, because you have to prove your residency for the community.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone as a group gets to vote on everyone. So that, because everyone votes, that has been deemed to satisfy the one person, one vote. And I would say, I don't have a number in my mind. If you go, it used to be easier on the AOE website to find all the mergers when they were still kind of percolating through. I would have guessed probably half of the mergers have been done this way, you know, because the proportional, you know, especially in situations like this, really doesn't satisfy some of the local political requirements.
Right.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine why people would want to do that, you know?
Well,
Yeah.
I think for us,
Sure.
it would certainly cause us to a lot of concern because you could pass through a great deal of legislation
Yeah.
concerning your school
Right.
and have no possible way to combat
Right.
that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and that's not a position that we want
Yeah.
to be in. Any of us want to be in.
Yeah.
We want to feel like we're being heard, and we want
Sure.
to know, you know, that
Or,
we're given a fair shot.
Yeah.
yeah.
So I mean, you can configure that in a way. I'm sorry, you know, you could figure out a way to do it. I would, you know, we should talk about where the process is now, because now we're, you know,
Right.
if you had hired me as a consultant 3 years ago, I'd be telling you about your options, and here we'd be chit-chatting about how to go forward. Now we're at a very different moment in time.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the point is a lot of districts who have figured out a way to do this have done exactly the hybrid model. You know, it's doable, it's understandable. We've had a lot of experience in the state doing it. A lot of people have had experience.
Maybe that's a good place for us to go to now, Secretary, is where are we and what are the options
Yeah.
of the folks of this supervisory
Yeah.
union moving forward?
Yeah.
I know there are options outside of the law, but I think part
Right.
of the reason we brought with you here was to give us
Yeah.
kind of a really good idea of what are the options within the law, if there is a way we can satisfy the law, and if not, there's obviously things that they can pursue outside of it. But
Yeah.
if there's a way that we can get this community to a place where Franklin and Highgate and Swanton can actually look at something and say, okay, we're not pumped, but this looks like a path forward.
Yeah.
Where are we in the process with the state board?
Yep.
Is there an amended thing that if they've got a group together, they can sit down and work through and put forward, just kind of the environment where we're at?
Yep.
I know some of our concerns are obviously assets. You know, right now the town,
Yep.
Highgate, feels like the school is our asset. We've been paying on it. We've been
Yep.
fixing it up. It's our baby, just like
Right.
Franklin's their
And
baby.
controlling our
and,
assets.
and we controlling our
Right.
assets.
Sure.
There's some adjacent lands that
Yeah.
people have donated for education and recreational benefits to the school, but
Right,
obviously the town doesn't want to lose those assets.
right,
So, that makes us nervous with Act 46 coming in.
right.
How would that affect? How can we maintain control of our assets?
Yep.
The merger may be a great thing, but losing our assets is not
Sure.
a good thing.
Yeah, so I'll come back to wrap on your point.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
But so once again, the questions you've had about representation and assets, those are really covered by those 14 points. Instead, I'll just throw out 706, that part of the law. Because when you're going through the exercise of planning a merger, you basically have to answer those 14 questions. Number 14 being, are there other things you want to talk about? But each one of those says what's the name of the new district going to be? What schools will it operate? So forth and so on. And of course you get to assets and liabilities, right? So, and I'm speaking primarily based on my experience as a consultant, as a superintendent, having dealt with several mergers and complex mergers in particular. Assets are pretty easy to handle, actually. Debt, on the other hand, is not. So with assets, what I see districts doing is, firstly, you have a date certain when the merger is going to go live. And basically, prior to that date, on that date, the next day, everything that's currently an asset of the district will become property of the new district. So until that date, people divert their assets if they're concerned about these issues.
Well, that's what
Land-
we're talking about.
Yeah, so
We can speak into that.
land, people are like, no, we're not gonna, that's nothing to do, so in between that go live date, so when you do your merger plan, you'll establish a go live date. Before that, people divert their assets as best they can.
Including buildings?
Well, let me get to that. Okay, so real estate that's not associated with a school, easy to do. You sell it to whoever. You'll have this conversation about reserve funds. Okay, so you have scholarship funds, you might have, building reserve funds. In one of my districts, they had, because of impact aid, which is money you get from the National Forest, they had $1.6 million in a reserve fund. Now, they're generous people, but they weren't going to give that to their neighbors. Okay? So they've been spending, what I typically see is people spend that down, or they figure out some way to invest it prior to the merger, which is a reasonable strategy, but it's sort of like the hangover. Once the merger kicks in, your tax rate was kept low because you spent all that money, and now you're going to feel the effect of that after the merger takes place. Real estate, generally, school buildings themselves, generally become property of the new school district with language that says if it's not going to be used for the purposes that we intend it to, it gets sold back to the community for $1. That's probably 90% of the mergers I see. Yeah.
I have a question too with regards to the assets. So is there a deadline, like a point of no return, that we have to make that decision? Is it that go live date, or is it a lot closer to now?
Yeah, so it'll kind of get me back to Dustin's question about where are we now in terms of the process, because if you want to pursue a merger like I'm describing to you, and I can tell you the sort of pros and cons of that from politically, I think it would probably be worth investigating, but you're gonna have to move awful quick. Last summer, I did a merger proposal with Bennington, which I thought was a crash course. Last year we felt they were under the gun because they wanted to take advantage of the red incentives that expired last November. The legislature had them expiring in June, but they extended them through November of last year. So we worked, it was like crash course meetings. It was like boom, 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 and we put together a proposal. Ultimately, 2 communities voted it down. But you can do one really quick. The law, Act 46, says you have until June 30, 2019 to do that. Okay? So you could do that. And I've only been on the state board for 1 meeting. But I've watched them over the years doing this process. So I know they would appreciate, if you wanted to do that, they don't want to impose this stuff on you guys anymore. And you want it. If you can find a way to do it, I'm sure they'd be very happy. To consider that. But, time is of the essence. So, you'd really want to move very aggressively between now and November 30th. The state board has to publish a statewide plan by November 30th. So you'd really have to demonstrate that you're moving forward pretty quickly, under that process. So you can do it, And we certainly, if you want to do that, I could pledge, the agency's cooperation to help you do it. Even if personally I had to act as your consultant to help you do that. But What was I talking about? Oh, and assets, okay, so assets typically with school buildings, yeah, they're sold to the new district, but there's also language that always gets included that if they ever want to do something else with the building, it gets sold back to you for $1. That's probably 90% of the merger language. Okay?
So as long as it maintains the school,
Yeah, if you run this place for the purposes that we're agreeing to merge, we have no problem. If you want to do something else with it, to say you don't want to use it anymore, typically the language says something like the town has rights of first refusal. You know, it's sold to you for $1.
How about all our repairs that we need? Should we wait?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned that. You know, I'm not going to mention any names, but you know, I know one district in central Vermont that was not interested at all. Their neighbors were interested in merging; they were not. And then suddenly they discovered an air quality issue with mold. Literally the next day, where they were back at the 706 merger study. Yeah, we're anxious to merge and share with you our problem. You know. That's neighborly. So,
well, it's just, I don't know if you're aware, but the 3 towns up here, Franklin, Swanton, and Highgate, all did a supervisory vote on town meeting day, and all 3 towns said we did not want to participate in Act 46.
Yeah.
Obviously,
I actually want to correct you on that. We have 4 towns in this
4
supervisory union, and Sheldon is also. They just happen to have a different governance structure than the other 3 schools.
Yeah, right. They tuition, right?
Franklin and Sheldon unanimously voted against this.
Yep.
Highgate was 103-1, and Swanton was still majority against this.
Yep.
So it's pretty disheartening when our voters, unanimously voted
Sure.
in one direction, which never happens, and then it's just chalked up as community sentiment.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's not available to the state board. Kind of has
but we beat them
They
up.
made a mistake.
the law is written in a way that's not a variable per se. I mean, you're to get to Dustin's, you know, what's the situation right now? You know, and that's the political reality. You guys are gonna have to figure out what you want to do. The state board has a responsibility in the law to create a statewide plan. I should say, by also way of introduction, I'm a non-voting member of the state board. So I'm involved in those deliberations. They're going to finalize that plan by November 30th, and what I expect them to do now, it'll be close to November 30th when they do that, because they're going to need a lot of time to put that together. The way things are set up in the state plan or the secretary's recommended draft, because you are members of the Union High School District, that's like, from a technical standpoint, a very easy merger. I know politically it's not easy, but technically it's very easy. So you're on that sort of list of districts that's sort of like a no-brainer. You guys are going to have to do that. So to Dustin's point, you know, what's the process now? You can try, well, I should say, to try to, you've already had a meeting. The state board's been in the northern part of the state, so you've had the opportunity to...
They were in Island Pond, right?
Newark.
Newark,
Yeah, so not in the northwest part. Yeah.
Might as well. That was an odd choice.
But I know you've had some folks at those meetings, so you've had a chance to do that.
We made it.
To be honest, we felt like we weren't heard.
Sure.
We felt like our alternative governance structure that was well thought out, well prepared, people spent millions of hours on, just wasn't considered. And maybe that was the point, was that it looked like we were a no-brainer, and therefore we didn't look at I don't know.
Yeah.
But it just felt like we were...
I can't, I don't know what the emotion of that. I can just tell you if you brought me in as a sort of a clinician to give you an opinion, I would say it's a no-brainer. Without knowing your communities, just looking at the governance structure, you don't have those barriers.
Right.
So it's going to be hard, I think, to, I did read your submission, and I did think it was thoughtful. But everything you came up with, I think, the state could say those things can still be accomplished and actually easier. No more gentlemen's agreements. We'll actually make it happen through merger. So right now, I think your option, to answer Dustin's questions, your options are to wait to see what the state's going to do to you, or try to move forward and figure something out. And your third option would be to do something outside the law, to try to change the law or participate in that political end of the process.
But it's too late if we want to go private, though. We can't.
Oh, let me talk about the private piece. Yeah, the school closure piece. So I've done some of that work for districts. I did some financial analysis last year for Ludlow, and then I helped them with their last-minute merger as well. The financial analysis for them pointed to them closing their high school and saving about $600,000 a year. you know, it's a classic example, I think, of high school, small high schools being really challenging to maintain from a business model perspective. So,
Before MVU, yes.
yeah, so I've done financial analysis that points the other way too. You know, so for me, it's not really, you know, I know closing, and I've closed schools, it's a wicked emotional process, all right? But I would hope you put some effort into the financial analysis of that and the educational analysis, because I don't think it's an easy decision to make. You know, even just take the emotions out of it, just looking at the numbers. The problem you're going to have now, you know, if what I've observed so far, I don't know if it's your case, you tell me. People are contemplating that as a way of avoiding the state plan. You know, meaning if we turn our district, current school district, into a different structure than the others, then technically they can't come together. If you're trying to do that, it's going to be really hard to avoid that right now because the timelines are such. The state board has to make a decision on its statewide plan based on the current status of the districts on November 30th. So unless you fundamentally change the structure of your district prior to November 30th, the state board is compelled to act based on the current status, not what its future status would be. So that means you need to configure your district differently before November 30th, you know.
So my question is, if Franklin was able to pull it off and go to a private school.
So is it just Franklin that's thinking of doing that?
Franklin has a petition that's signed to have a town meeting to vote on becoming a non-operating
So that would be
district.
like an advisory vote. I haven't seen the language, but you're,
No.
Not
because
advisory,
have you
no,
consulted an
it's-
attorney on how to do that? Because it isn't the voter's authority necessarily.
That I'm not.
Yeah,
not
you might
sure
want to
about
do
that,
that
but yeah,
because,
we will be soon.
yeah. So at least it would be an advisory vote, you know. But yeah, there's you'd have to figure out that process a little bit.
Because my worry is if they do that,
Right.
then their students would have choice of high school, I'm assuming, at a tuition
Yeah, so
base.
this gets
So then,
complicated.
right, and then
Yeah.
so what that means is the two towns left in our district will now have to fund complete MVU. So their $35 million budget becomes just two towns
Yeah,
liability, and
Right.
so
that
it's
makes
not,
people leave our community,
it's
not stay.
It's not going to work out quite that way. And this is hypothetical.
Yep.
Okay, so I might be wrong. Probably wrong. But I'm gonna-
Go ahead and say it anyway, Secretary.
No, you're on
So this
camera,
is,
right?
you guys, if we forget about Sheldon, I don't mean to forget about him, I'm just gonna take him out of the mix, once again, just from a clinical standpoint, analysis standpoint. Okay, so everyone here other than Sheldon's a member of the Missisquoi Union High School School District, right? Franklin becomes a non-operating school, or chooses to become a non-operating school district K through 6. Is it K through 6, right?
K through 6, yeah.
But still a member of Missisquoi 7 through 12.
I think that's the way that
Yeah.
article is written.
Yeah, so this would be like the North Bennington scenario. So you might want to talk to them. This is, you would still, what would be called a MUD, Modified Unified Union School District. So they're still, in that scenario, still members of the Missisquoi board. That board would become a K-12 board if the others were merged. They would not be allowed to vote on things that were pertinent to elementary. Or, so, you know, so this
hard
is,
to cut it.
yeah, and that's what happened. It's kind of weird, but it worked. I mean, there's a place to do that in the law, so they'd still be part of the high school. On the other hand, if Franklin desired to, well, he's using things, I don't know if it's true about Franklin, but say you wanted to shut down your elementary school and have school choice, K through 12. Is that what you're thinking of?
No,
No.
Yes.
Okay. I won't explore that.
they want to become a private elementary school.
Yeah, so that, you know, really from the school district standpoint, the school district can't be involved in turning the school into an independent school. The school district's authority under the law is to either operate a school or not operate a school.
So they would vote, where the vote is to not operate the school
That's correct.
anymore.
Yeah,
And then
you know, the
be
state,
a tuition, and then we would.
some other group in the community
Yes,
might turn that
would
order.
start.
That's correct.
That's what we're,
Yeah.
the direction that we're heading.
Yeah, so the way, you know, the law, you know, you declared at the beginning of the meeting, which I'm glad to hear you want to follow the law. Okay, that's great. I applaud that. Okay, so the way the law is set up is the state's ultimately responsible for the education of every student. The state delegates a lot of authority to local authorities. That's why we're a local control state. The state says you have two options to educate your kids. You cannot not educate your kids. You know, there's two options. You can either operate a school, or you provide tuition for them to be educated someplace else. And you can do that across different grade levels. You don't have to operate schools K through 12. You can operate K6, have choice 7, 12, and all this stuff. So, yeah, so you guys would be looking at, the school district's authority is really over that aspect of running the school. And in a case when you only have one school, you have to have voter approval first to tuition the districts out, to tuition students out. So those two statutes are hooked together. Now, if I won't go in, I'll go into it. If you were like Burlington and you operated 4 elementary schools, you don't need any voter approval to shut down one of those schools. So it's basically that decision about allocating resources, because it's one district.
So is that the same if we merge?
Well,
there would
usually-
be no, if they wanted to close the Franklin school, there would be no need for a vote?
No, because what happens with the merger, and this is why so many small districts have decided to engage in the mergers, because they've been able to put in the statute, the language of protection of that decision. So,
But the only thing we hear about that is that once the school, the new board is formed, they can change any of those policies that they,
yeah, no, they can't. I mean, it depends how you set up the articles, but everyone, all these issues people have thought about and figured a way around. I mean, so, firstly, back when the red incentives were on the table last year, the red law, Act 153, guaranteed at least 4 years of protection, meaning no school could be closed without the town that it was in giving approval for 4 years. With Act 46, people in the state board sort of encouraged people to do that. People brought in more protections beyond what the basic law provided. So it's not unusual to find in merger documents that communities have embedded in their articles of agreement that the school can never be closed without approval of the town first. So people use the merger place as a way to protect that issue.
and those can't be changed.
Yeah, depending on how the articles get set up, it depends on who votes on what as part of the process. So you can set it up either way. You could give authority to a future school board to change the articles, the Constitution, if you will, or the articles can be preserved for the voters to change only.
But the problem with having the voters do it is, like you said, all the voters are mingled together.
Yeah, except they also include specific language that says, this town must first vote on it. If you just pull some of the articles down, people have solved this problem.
So, I guess our understanding of 706N, which describes changing the Articles of Agreement, is
Yeah.
that any town can petition to hold a special election once a year to amend Articles of Agreement.
Yeah, it really depends on how the articles were formulated. So I've seen lawyers do it both ways. I've been involved in mergers with several different school attorneys. I've seen one set of articles that everything is locked in by the voters, that nothing can change, I've seen the opposite, where everything is given to the board, and then I've seen differences, and typically school closure issues, those are things that are preserved for the voters. So you can do it lots of different ways. Who's your school attorney? Do you have
The board. School attorneys, Lynn.
Live and watch?
Yeah.
Yeah, those guys are very familiar with the process. They could advise you on that.
Yeah.
So what you would do, if you're interested, you just go through and say, here are our concerns, how can we control for this? And there's tons of examples of how people have done this. And other people have the exact same concerns,
Yeah. I mean, I guess even with all this, still the ultimate concern of Franklin is that in a merged district, best case scenario, we're now 33% of the board. Right now, we're 100% of the board. And so it's that
going to be
loss of
different. I swear,
control.
you could control the board, but it wouldn't necessarily be 30, depending on if you did the hybrid model.
No, that's,
But it's less than 100, for
Right.
sure.
So, I mean, from Franklin's position, there's a lot of frustration because we have one of the top-ranked elementary schools in the state.
Right.
We take a lot of pride in that, and it's because of our governance, our overseeing and having control over who the principal is, who our teachers are, those things. And we also are part of MVU.
Right.
We're not quite so proud
Yeah.
of the high school as we are of our elementary school. We have a very tight control on the budget for the
Sure.
Franklin Elementary School. We see it, it's not as big, it's easier to look at, it's easier to control. We look at MVU's budget, we go to those budget meetings, and it's like, it's a mess.
Sure.
I mean, there's just so many numbers, and they can, you ask about this number, and they tell you about this other thing, and it's like, to put all our schools together into that jumble, it just feels like we've lost control.
Yeah.
And we don't, you know, we don't want that to happen to our school. We don't want our principal to be taken out of our school to go to one of the other schools because they're having problems. I'm not saying that's gonna happen,
Right.
but we know that we've got control of it right now.
Sure.
And I can tell you there is absolutely no appetite at all for merger. And the town is, as Devin has said, is already started to move. The town is going to do whatever it possibly can under its power
Sure.
to prevent this from happening and be able to keep control of our school.
Yeah. No, it's, yeah, you know, you gotta do what you gotta do, right? So, I would just think it's, my experience going into communities, especially, I would say last year at the tail end of the process, and I can pretty much tell if they haven't had a good experience working together as a system, this is really hard for them to do, you know? It's hard for people to imagine, like you mentioned, looking at this big budget, right? So, on the other hand, districts who have experienced success working together find this a little more palatable to do.
And I mean, we may be a little different there because we do work together
Yeah.
at MVU and with our supervisory union board, which works very well together. And we still have no appetite for
Yeah, I would,
consolidation.
in my opinion, that would have been stronger if you had actually gone through the 14 questions and actually try it out, you know, model it out. So I've had boards who are very equally protective of their school, who believe equally that their school is one of the best in the state, actually model out what does it look like if we had to close our school financially, you know? And they turn back to their voters and say, we've done the modeling, we think there's more here than money that's important to us, and therefore we've justified the continued existence of our school. So you have to, I think as board members, not, you know, to say, I just think you have to do that homework. Now, just to be practical, what Dustin's saying, we're down to sort of a certain moment in time. But, you know, the state has an interest in these things too. I mean, and it's hard from the state's perspective to reconcile, and that's, I think, why the legislature in its wisdom left it to a deliberative body by the state board and not the agency to figure this out at the end, you know? The agency can just sort of apply the law. The state board can take testimony and figure out the political solution, but from things like you talked about the big budget, Franklin citizens currently are also looking at a composite tax rate, which is really weird. So you have to figure out, if you're a Franklin taxpayer and you're trying to figure out, why are my taxes going up, you know? You have to look at the height, you get part of your tax rate is prorated based on the Union School District and part of it's prorated on the elementary district. So you actually have two tax rates that come together in one. I mean, part of what Act 46 or merger will do is just eliminate that and create one tax rate, which, you know, particularly if you have supervisory union budgets, which, you know, you don't get to vote on. You know, I'm just telling you what people have found through merging is they eliminate their SU budgets, they create one budget, they get direct vote on their SU, they get one tax
We've
rate.
got one of the lowest per
Yeah.
pupil costs in the state.
Yeah.
And if we merge, we know that that's going on.
Yeah, and that's a challenge for you right now because the incentives are pretty much off the table. You know, so one of the purpose of the incentives was to deal with those issues. When I've worked with districts merging, basically what happens when you
But
throw
those incentives don't last short term.
no, but they get you basically. You know, firstly, it's all
They're good about it.
it's all our money. It's state money. You know, so we're all paying for it one way or the other. You know, and that's the problem. Exact problem we're in. So, you know, what happens if you just merge the districts? That basically the tax rate gravitates to the mean or the average rate. So if you're on the bottom side of that, yeah, you get hit. If you're on the high end, you get a benefit of it. But the incentives are really designed to sort of cushion that transition.
I want to say something. I'm really disheartened by what you said about the 706 study and how we didn't do our homework because I'm on the SU board. I have been pretty much since Act 46 started up here for us. And we've put countless hours into putting together that AGS and to answer the 5 goals of Act 46 and to show how we can improve as an SU but stay as the governance structure we have now.
Sure.
So it's not that we just willy-nilly decided not to do this.
That is
We put
I
a
didn't-
lot
I
of
didn't
time
say
into
willy-nilly.
this.
Yeah.
Well, I'm taking it that way, and I
As
take a
someone-
personal offense to that. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that
And
way.
then another aspect that you brought up is the financial benefits. There's only one town in this entire SU that benefits from merging, and it's not earth-shattering benefit. Franklin gets hit very hard with tax increase. We get with a tax increase.
Well, the point I made about 706 is if I was picking this up as I am now, if you had done the 706, I'd have a lot more information, you know, because that would have walked us through more pretty high level financial analysis in particular. So I'd be able to see that, so I'd be able to pick up a report and kind of give you my opinion on it.
We have a financial analysis in our report, in our
But a
AGS.
financial analysis of the complete merger, whether it was a good idea or not just.
Yeah, we did a
Okay.
complete analysis of if we merged and if we stayed separate.
Who had that again?
The Act 46 committee.
Yeah, I looked at that. It's still not what I would have done as part of a 706. It's a little different. But, yeah, I didn't mean to,
That was pretty good.
willy-nilly, yeah. No, it's a different arrangement of the data, and it's more complete.
I got
under 706.
one question,
Sure.
quick question. Is there any towns that taxes actually went down with Act 46?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
so it's saving money.
absolutely.
'Cause I'm hearing opposite.
Well,
but-
people who don't like it, are saying different things. I mean, I don't, I'll say, I don't have a philosophical approach to this. I could tell you, for 2 years, I was teaching a class at St. Mike's, Legal and Financial Management Schools, which is a class that talks about school law and school finance. Their final projects of that course, they had to analyze Act 46 mergers, And I would say 99% of the time, they found savings in every single merger that was being proposed. So it's interesting to me, how that gets manipulated a little bit in the press sometimes. Because
Well, I
I
mean,
understand people aren't, seeing that, but when you look at the mergers, I was hired to work with Essex and Westford when they merged. I can remember going back in the days of Act 153, and this is probably around 2010-ish or so, they were being considered for merging. I don't know if you're familiar with these communities, they're kind of close together, So they commissioned a very elaborate report with a lot of expertise and numbers that justified keeping the way they are, because they demonstrated like it's gonna cost $300,000 or something to merge these two districts, even though it would limit a supervisory unit. Son of a gun, when the law changed and they could figure out a way forward, they were suddenly demonstrating significant savings. So sometimes I think, politically people, if you want to justify one thing versus the other, you can. But yeah, what I'm seeing overall currently is I think there's been this issue of coming to the mean. Yeah, I think there's winners and losers on that kind of averaging things out. But with the mergers that in particular have helped dissolve supervisory unions, you dissolve a supervisory union, that's savings.
Right, but we already have only one supervisor
That's right.
union anyway,
Yeah.
so that's why I'm.
Yeah, but it's in places where that's happening, those are more significant. So we did a merger when that red was formed, and it joined our districts. Our districts immediately saved $100,000 a year on an annualized basis because we were spreading our administrative costs over more districts. But that also led to the dissolution of the Windsor Southwest Supervisory Union, so the state was saving big money on that. But our taxes started to spike right up immediately afterwards because not everyone was doing that work, and that's why doing it across the system is getting us where we are.
Because our school boards are all volunteer, so
Yeah.
there's no savings there.
Yeah, no.
You
And
know,
the big,
it's-
80% of the costs in the state in education are due to personnel, right? So I think, to answer your question initially, yes, people are seeing savings through merger that they wouldn't have otherwise seen. Unfortunately, we don't model the old system like it was before, so we can't really do that comparison because people are like, our taxes are still up. Yeah, we never said they would never go up again, but if we stayed out where we were before, they'd be higher.
Yep.
But the real trick, and I'm hopeful, and this is a good political concern, Act 46 through merging, I think will give us a better handle on personnel. So as we've seen significant decline in students across the state, about a 30% decline. School boards do a good job of managing their costs in their small silos of governance. If now boards are in control of more schools, they can assign those personnel more directly. So I've seen that in my old district a lot. They've been able to, in some cases, combine positions to save positions.
I mean, I can see where you save money in like kindergarten, where you do kindergarten or pre-K, you do pre-K in the morning in Swan, and then pre-K in the afternoon in Highgate, or vice versa. I could see you could save money there, but in the end, you still have the same amount of students. You just need the same amount of teachers across. I just
But I
don't
think that's
see.
the point, Josh, is we don't have the same amount of
Yeah, the
students.
number of students.
Our
I
system
know.
over the last
Well, we haven't
25
seen that
years.
in our district.
Yeah, and that's the hard part is you have schools that are not seeing the
Right, so why are we being targeted?
Well, it's not you, it's the whole system,
So so you're putting everybody in one,
No, I mean,
that's what it seems like, because it
Yeah.
seems like
Each-
we're not the problem.
yeah,
We've got a low tax rate, our low per pupil cost. We've got a
We share-
great education.
we share one supervisor.
There's no issues like you were talking about where one school is offering stuff that other ones aren't.
Sure.
We've already merged the high school, and that's where those issues happen, and that's why we merged them. So we have all these things that we really aren't the problem, but yet we're being forced into the same pie.
And
Yeah,
what-
so the theory was to give locals a chance to do that, but the policy goals, it's a good idea perhaps to go back and revisit that. I mean, the overarching policy goal of Act 46 is to create a more sustainable governance structure overall. The law doesn't really talk about what was meant by sustainable governance structure. In my experience, I could break that down to a few things. One is SU boards having difficulty getting quorums for meetings. Have you guys ever had that problem? Never? Okay. We know about, I think it's over 90% of the school board elections in the state are run uncontested. So do you have a lot of competition for your school board seats?
No.
Yeah,
Not a
so,
lot.
and that, you could view that as maybe a positive thing, but in some communities, that's not viewed as a positive thing.
Well, in St. Albans City 2 years
Yeah.
ago, they had 3 seats go unopened.
Yeah.
and the council
Have you had frequent turnover of leadership in board members? I mean, is it the
No.
same board members have been on it? Have you had turnover?
This year we had some, but in the
This
past.
year is an abnormal. We just actually had one get off the board that's been on for 26 years.
And how about superintendent leadership? You had Jack McCarthy for a long time, right? And then you had Winton for a bit, and now you've got Julie.
Yep.
So you've been pretty stable there as well, but that hasn't also been the case in many places. So particularly where huh?
Sorry.
Yeah,
But
I'm
don't
sorry.
you think that this is kind of an optimistic view to consider this a savings of money? Because we've all seen government. The more government, the more money we spend. And the less say you have in it.
Less control
It's,
of your own town?
it's
Yeah.
just,
As
we'd
is right
like
now,
to
we don't,
think,
we don't even get to see our supervisor union.
right, we'd like to
Budget.
think
We have
that it
no
would
idea.
save money, and it's a great idea.
No, I
And
mean-
theoretically, it should work.
We would keep everything the same
But
if it
the
wasn't for
opposite
30% of the
happens.
pupils declining and the number of staff being employed the same. You know, that's,
But I mean, our supervisor union staff went from 5 people to, it exploded.
Yeah,
It's like, what
definitely.
the heck happened?
It's one of the reasons
If you
why
want to save
we're-
money, that's where the control needs to be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's one of the things that
Not
we've all been
schools.
talking about here. We're slowly losing control.
yeah,
We are trying to get back to where we can vote on the SU budget.
yeah.
That's not the direction the mergers are headed
No, that's
towards.
exactly where it's going.
And that's where one of our big problems
Sure.
is the SU budget.
Right. No, if you merge, you have one big budget and you then have like an administrative department. So you get, I'm just saying what people get out of the merging. You have one budget, you don't have an SU budget anymore, you know? So you have direct vote of your SU budget. You know, I'm
Each town
happy
doesn't, right? Just the people on the board.
if you have one district, the whole district gets to vote on the entire budget.
Yes, that would
was
be
the
an
SU. So you
Australian
get
ballot.
direct, you get direct vote.
And that's another point about the Australian ballot. That's not how we vote.
Right,
We vote off the floor.
yeah.
Right.
And it's
It's a big change.
a big change.
Yeah.
And what I've seen when MVU changed to that is nobody goes to the budget meeting,
Right.
anybody. Nobody goes to the information
Yeah.
meeting. I'll tell you, we're the smallest town there. We have usually more representatives at that meeting
Yeah.
than the other towns.
Yeah, Australian
So
ballot.
people are going and they're voting and they don't even really understand what they're voting for.
Right.
When we have a town meeting, it's all, we present our budget for the town, they present their budget, they just tell what's going on. The people on the floor get to ask questions, so it's an informed vote.
Right.
We're gonna lose that.
Yeah.
And what I've seen with MVU losing that,
And not only that,
Right,
people
get a
just
number.
vote-
Is it
just vote
okay?
down budgets
what I worry
because
about
they can.
is us losing people from the state, and actually leaving the state
Yeah.
over these situations. And I know of some that have,
Yeah.
and are stating that, if we're losing the control, we're going somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's the right
Yeah.
thing to do, but I'm saying people, when they've had enough, they've had enough.
Yeah, and when I lived in the kingdom, we did all our floor votes, so
So
it's
you
what
know.
I'm used to.
Yeah, that's yours. Well.
I've seen the the argument of the Australian ballot, and I would agree that most mergers use it because you have multiple towns involved, and it's really hard. You could do a combined district meeting, and actually, the one I did in Manchester has still a floor vote. So you don't have to go to Australian ballot, but it's harder to staff, okay? But I think, what I've heard is the counter argument is that, with a floor vote, anyone who shows up that night gets to vote, So if it's a snowstorm and 20 people show up, those 20 people decide the whole budget. In my experience, I haven't seen, and I did it for.
The people who really feel that
You know, that's the, right,
are
if
going
you're
to make
really
it.
interested, but you're
We
still
did
not.
this, we
yeah.
did the same thing here for a roof.
Yeah,
We called a special meeting, 10 people showed
yeah,
up.
you vote
But
the
those are the 10 people that care. The rest of the people
Yeah.
that don't care, are they gonna make an educated
Right.
vote on that anyway?
So what I hear is the counter argument
You know,
for the Australian ballot is, I work all the time, I can't get to that meeting.
Oh,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I hear ya.
it's convenient for me.
That's why they make, yeah.
So you're just gonna have, there's pros and cons to that both ways. But I would say as part of merging, I can think of one example where they kept their floor vote. It's, when you go into that meeting, you have to sign in with the checklist for your town, but everyone in there is combined and they view it as one big, and I don't know.
That's the
what
way MVU used to be.
Yeah, yeah. And the voters can decide to flip it back. That the voting methodology is something reserved to the voters. So the voters could decide in the subsequent or future meeting to change the methodology. But I would say by far and away, most of these combined mergers do go to Australian ballot because it's more convenient.
I don't,
Yeah,
with
but
Swan, I don't see it,
yeah.
because that's the way they do all theirs.
Yeah. So you're,
Exactly.
I'm happy to, I can sort of give you what I think is, why Act 46 is important, but if you have specific questions on merging or what to do right now at this moment of time, I'm happy to do that too. I mean, if you want.
I have a question
Yeah,
about
sure.
the AGS side of Act
Yeah.
46. We had a meeting not too long ago with the Lieutenant Governor, and every time we brought up a point, he said, well, that's part of the off-ramp and the AGS and Act 46.
Right.
Which, what I said earlier, we put a lot of time into,
Yeah.
and we felt we went the right direction because we felt the 706 study was a setup to merge, not a setup to find out what was best for our
Yeah.
SU. So we decided to put a lot of due diligence into answering the goals and whatnot. And every time you brought up an example, we've said that it doesn't apply to us like the law was intending. So this law does not suit all, so they've created this off-ramp of an AGS. So we went through the proper steps of doing this AGS, and we've basically been shunned along the way, in my opinion, that we've just gone through the steps, they've listened to us because they have to, and that's as far as we've gone.
I think just because you went through the process, you shouldn't have interpreted that as a guarantee that the state board was gonna do that.
I don't take it as a guarantee, but it would be nice that when we present an argument that we are given an adequate opportunity to represent ourselves, not given 20 minutes and told to pack it in that time.
It's tough. We did, my first meeting, we did one of those meetings where everyone had 20 minutes, it's tough.
Yeah, and the general sense there, we understand having Union High School and having similar structures that from a technical perspective, sure, it makes a lot of sense. But that sense that the other side, the secretary at the time, wasn't giving us a fair shake on that was, the fact that we presented the geographical isolation argument, which is specifically in the law, and was never mentioned. So it felt a lot like it didn't matter what we presented.
Yeah.
It was technically easy to merge us, so that was the predetermined.
Couldn't even get our name right.
Yeah, so where we are now is you still have an opportunity to influence that process. I support say my predecessor's approach that I don't think the agency's role is to do anything but to interpret the law very narrowly, particularly where there were secretaries changing. But now the state board, a political body, has that responsibility, and I think it was wise of the legislature to, put it in the final hands of their authority. You have an opportunity to try to influence that, but that's the reality where you're at now. Is either try to influence that before it gets published, or figure out what you're going to do.
We are hopeful that the board and you as part of that process, even though non-voting, will take into account the issues of different debt burdens, which is specifically part of one of those off ramps for Act 46 to encourage a Section 9 AGS, and the geographical isolation component, because those were left out of that secretary's report.
And I think where we are now, what I heard, the state board, we went through a fairly long meeting the other day, Wednesday. At the end of that meeting, they started to talk a little bit about how they were going to organize their approach to kind of sifting through all this testimony. And they decided to put a hold on it because they still have one more meeting to do the 20-minute thing. So out of respect for that group, and that will be in Chester, Vermont, that'll be the Southern Vermont meeting, I forget the date. but they're basically not going to engage in deliberations until they've heard that last piece, and then they're going to start to shift direction and start to deliberate. I know just based on, and you can read the minutes or watch the video, they started to talk about things like debt and can we get some information on these things. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. But you know, one is you want to follow that process and do what you can politically to influence it to get what you think you need best. And then secondly is to weigh out whether you want to try that option of pursuing a 706 is still available. And if you have options of changing your configuration, if you're interested in doing a school closure issue, I would just recommend you really do a good, particularly a financial model of that. I've done some of those, and I find that depending on the size of the school, it's easy to create a sustainable model, more so than if it's really, you know, if it's really small, it's really hard to set that up properly. So, and it's easy enough to model out if you use like sort of a union tuition average for elementary school. You can come up with a sort of a cost-benefit analysis in terms of tax rate. But you have to also think about the educational aspects as well, you know, which is critical.
So I'll ask a quick question.
Sure.
Over the mountain there, when we went over the place we had the meeting there in the mountains.
Newark?
Newark.
Yeah.
There were some towns there that were really in trouble for trucking their kids in the mud and over the mountains.
Yeah, transportation.
Transportation was
Yeah.
gonna be a lot worse than here.
Yeah.
And I felt pretty sad for that myself,
Yeah.
for those people. And I guess my question now is, I mean, we're calling upon you and hoping that you're listening for us. And have any of those folks over there made an attempt to speak with you and meet with you before the big October? Or is that
Yeah, I've
November?
received a lot of input. I don't know which group
No.
you're speaking of in particular, but that area, yeah.
That area in
Yeah,
general.
they've been very involved in the
Well, they
process.
had a lot of travel involved. There
Yeah.
was gonna be hours to get their kids
Yeah,
trucked.
and
that
the
happened.
travel thing is interesting too, because the assumption is their school would be closed through merger.
Right, and that's
So-
really what they're worried about.
Yeah, so it's really, first
Like
thing is, once
Franklin.
again, you can protect your school ever from closing, so.
Okay.
But it's interesting, under Vermont law, and board members here know this, you don't have to transport students at all,
Right.
Yeah,
So,
Right.
the issue right now could be, kids could be driving over mud, and, boards aren't required to transport students. So, I mean, I think the logic is, our school will automatically be
But I mean,
closed.
families leave town.
hopefully not.
Hopefully not.
That's the case.
Yeah,
Okay.
but when they start talking about
Well, they're a
2
city,
hours.
they're densely
Well,
populated. If you
I
tell
was
them
there
to go
for
around,
Eastern
then
Net
drive
as well.
I live at
And,
St. Albans Bay.
You know,
That's not-
if you don't take the time,
You can live just as far away
that's
from
why
me
you're
as you
here.
can
Thank
from
you.
you.
And we really do,
Yeah.
we appreciate your time being here
Yeah, I
as
think
well.
that the transportation issue will be a big one going forward in the state. I mean, it's the historic law, the law that's on the books now says boards may transport students,
Right, we get that.
So the theory of, what the people are pointing out to, if our school were to close, students would be on, well, firstly, the schools might not close if you protect it in the merger articles. But the issue of transportation, I would, just from my perspective as a new secretary, I think is one that we're gonna have to figure out as a state.
Right.
Because we have the issue in Essex where we can't find bus drivers, so there's fewer and fewer people who are interested in doing that work. But, boards, in my experience, can generally, I mean, I live in a town that doesn't transport students to high school, but usually what we find in school board policies is they transport some places, not other places. So we might say, well, 80% of our kids go this way, so therefore we'll provide buses there. And if you want to go some person, no one goes anywhere. You're on your own, And I've seen districts do versions of that where they might say, 90% of our kids go here. If you want to go somewhere else, we'll give you a stipend equal to, so they'll pay parents to take their kids.
When
elsewhere.
Alberg, when we MVU first went in, Alberg had the privileges if they wanted to go to New York, across the lake.
Yeah,
And so, they
Yeah.
had a direction more than one.
yeah. So we have, and I routinely would have concerned taxpayers in my office going, saw that bus go by my house again, there were 2 kids on it.
Yeah,
And what are we doing about that, right?
yeah.
And then I have parents in my office the next day saying, I want door-to-door service for my kid. And
Well,
we have.
fortunately with some parents today, if you don't have a bus pick up the kids, those kids aren't getting to school.
I know, and that's a real equity
And
issue for our kids. There's a
It
lot
It
of
is what it is,
Would be
but
sad.
I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I had
our
districts
kids,
that if
I
we
agree, our
didn't,
kids need to be educated and
if we didn't go up and get them, they wouldn't, go up and I can think of towns where if we did right up that mountain one way to get 2 kids, they wouldn't get to school.
Yep.
So it's an equity issue. as well. And we see it even in Burlington, where we rely on the municipal transit service to get kids to school, you know, so it's going to be a challenging thing. It's expensive, that's the other piece, you know, so we have a reimbursement model,
Fuel prices.
you know,
go up
basically
and
about
down.
40% reimbursement transporting to and from school. And that's going to be huge as we start to unpack this through merging, you know. But I see that as an unresolved issue. You know, right now the old law says, you know, you don't have to transport it at all, and it's increasingly becoming an issue for folks, whether they can for the drivers or not.
So another
Sure.
equity issue for me would be, so both Highgate and MVU have been an identified school for some time, many
Okay.
years.
Yeah,
So,
you mean in terms of adequate yearly progress and the No Child Left Behind Act?
yes,
Yeah,
we are doing a much better
Yeah,
job
good.
now, and we're improving. But what happened? You know, why did we get left out of the mix? You know,
Well, that was in our report, all the
yeah, we kind of,
surveys and we put it all up there.
Yeah,
Showing that
we,
we are making progress.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, but I mean, why didn't this state board of ed step in and say, okay, like Franklin does do a great job
Yeah.
for their children, but if we're merging,
right.
they don't want to lose
Sure.
the great
Momentum.
of their school
Right.
to merge it with, and that may have to do with poverty, it may have to do
Yeah.
with a number of things, but
Bigger
I guess we were looking to find out, what's the Department of Ed have to
Right.
do with this? Where do
Yeah.
they step in? How come?
Well, I think, you know, what happened is the federal, I mean, we've been dealing with federal law, No Child Left Behind Act, and that's where the schools got
Definitely.
identified, you know, that basically in 2014, every school in the state was identified. You know, Vermont was one of the few states that didn't have an off-ramp for No Child Left Behind Act, you know, because we just couldn't figure out, we didn't have a staff to write a plan to get off the highway, you know, so we had to follow through the end. But now we're under a different system, which is ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act. And we have a new system of accountability where we sort of peer visit each other's schools. So, yeah, I think, you know, back to the idea of local control versus state control, the state's real, I think, ultimate responsibility is to ensure this equity piece. And not only just equity, but also high quality. So everyone should have,
Yes.
every student should have access to a high quality education. You can get to equity by lowering quality. That's not really what we're interested in doing, right?
Right.
So we've got to stay focused on quality and ensure that everyone has equal opportunity. And that's, you know, part and parcel of what I did in the Northeast Kingdom, my school in Canaan. I mean, we worked really, really hard to give those kids equal opportunity, you know, and it's hard. You have to struggle pretty hard in the rural areas to do that. But as a state, we're gonna really screw up if we don't attend to that issue. But you know, the new rules are out in terms of school performance, and it's something, I mean, once again, the state board has its criteria. One of them is equity and high quality. And that's what they're gonna be looking at from a merger standpoint. Does your merger allow that to happen better?
Right.
You know, for sure.
Because, you know, for me, that would be a concern.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, yeah, it's a concern for all
merging,
of us.
does that make us better
Yeah.
or worse for our children?
Yeah.
We've gotten to a position where a lot of times we've become babysitters
Yeah.
because of a lot of social problems.
Yeah.
We're doing a disservice to those children.
Yeah.
And I think it's,
We
you
are
know,
not preparing them
Yeah.
for a future to make a good living.
we've got a lot of challenges as a state, you know,
Yeah.
both in terms of growing our economy and dealing with some of these societal issues. And whether we merge or not, we have to become more systematic as a school system in order to help those kids. You know, we can't just have, you know, for instance, Act 153 required districts to have a single centralized curriculum process. You know, we have districts in the state that still don't have that. You know, kids in poverty are the ones that suffer the most when there isn't a well-articulated curriculum. If we don't have a well-articulated curriculum, we can't structure our remediation resources like special ed and Title I. So it's like we have all these millions of dollars being spent on something that really doesn't have clear articulation of standards. So, and the kids in poverty are the ones that struggle the most with that. They go home, they don't have books and other ways. They really rely on school. So, yeah, we're going to have to be very, very cautious about any of that as we go forward. But, and that'll, I'm sure, I know it is, the state board, it's one of their primary concerns is to look at that.
Just, I have to head out, but I want to thank you for coming here
No,
tonight and
happy to
listening to
come
us. I
again
want to
sometime
thank
if you
everyone
guys-
else for being
yeah.
here tonight.
Yeah.
I'm just going to end by saying that if a merger is mandated for us,
Yeah.
I truly fear equal representation,
Yeah,
and I fear for I'm speaking for Franklin because I'm
Sure.
from Franklin. I fear for Franklin's future
yeah,
because currently we can prove on paper
right,
that people come to Franklin because of the school.
right,
People don't travel through Franklin because they're traveling through Franklin.
yeah,
If you're in Franklin, it's because you live there. You're going to work or you're coming back home from work.
yeah,
There's no cell service here in Franklin. There's no nothing.
yeah,
Our heart of our community is our school.
yeah,
We feel really close to that.
Yeah.
It's our pride.
yeah,
And I'm sure that we're not the only town in the state that feels that way. I do believe that a merger works and is the best thing for some.
right,
I just certainly don't feel that it's the case for us.
yeah,
And lack of control, I truly feel that we're going to lose that. You shouldn't hear people talk.
yeah,
We're concerned and we're saddened by this.
yeah,
And the last thing that I'm going to say is I really wish that the state would do a little bit better with democracy, because as a community, whether it's Franklin or Highgate, we said we want to take care of our
Right.
community. We have no say.
right,
Where's the democracy in that?
yeah.
We don't have a voice.
Yeah, no, I've heard that loud and clear through even the one meeting I was at, for sure. And I think, the state is us, it's not some other entity,
Right.
I'm now the state, Last week I wasn't. I think we'd be in a different place if we didn't have this significant financial crisis in front of us. It's a different animal, and it's, as you know,
But they're able to afford their school. We're able to afford
from
our
a state
school, so-
perspective, we don't. We're at an affordability crisis, I would say. The system hasn't been able to respond to the declining number of students. So from a state perspective, once again, it's all of us, we have to be concerned about, how we're gonna deal with that.
It wasn't that long ago that because Franklin can prove that our numbers maintain the students year after year, we were concerned as a growing school because we were maintaining our students.
Yeah,
We were bursting at the seams too in Highgate.
So, anyway,
in your high school, are I heard dissatisfaction with high school.
personally, I am not satisfied with our high school,
So
no.
that's part of the talk here too. It's not, you as a group of communities successfully or not run a high school. That's critical for the success of our students in the state. So if we're just talking about elementary governance, that's great, but it's part of the K-12 system, and that's the whole point. We have to be concerned. If you are locally dissatisfied with your high school's performance, we at the state level rely on you as locals to make that
But our high
change.
school is what we have merged, and it didn't work.
Yeah, so that's,
Yeah.
right.
So-
But there's examples of other merged high schools that do very well. Some of our best high schools in the state are merged high schools or union high schools.
This one isn't.
Yeah, so we've got to figure that out. Regardless of what happens with this, that's got to be a priority.
Yes.
Because,
You would want to have a vote in Franklin to see if you wanted to get out of MVU.
yeah, they'd have to let you go too.
No, that's what I mean, but
Yeah.
that's, I'm afraid what the vote would be.
Yeah, but that's, the state relies on locals to figure that out. So we've got to help you do that because
I would
that's,
say leave the towns alone, the elementary schools, and let's focus more of this energy
Yeah.
on our high school, and then that would make all the communities very happy. Because there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of talk right now. I mean, I'm one of my
Yep.
kids. They're getting older. Oh, they gotta go to MVU. Oh. It's a crappy feeling to have.
yeah, we've got to figure that
I
out
mean-
for you.
As an MVU kid.
Right. I went to MVU.
Yeah,
I did too.
I'm terrible at math. I'm terrible at math.
And I went to BFA, I can't count either, man.
I could draw like crazy.
But
I could play the drums.
something
I'm great at sports. I'm terrible at
Well, I
math.
don't know about great.
something the
He
governor
knows. Don't let him fool him.
something the governor mentioned was that the state does a poor job of rewarding the schools that stay within their budgets. That
Yeah.
maybe that's part of the problem as well. That maybe these schools like Highgate and Swan, who have a lower per pupil cost, yeah, and definitely Franklin, maybe that's the problem. Maybe it's,
Yeah,
because this is a statewide system and you throw
Yeah.
all the money in the same pot and then
Right.
you divide it.
yeah,
Maybe it's time to look at some of these schools that
Individual.
hog their share
yeah.
It's a fact.
and say, whoa,
And I think the legislature's about to do that. I
Yeah.
think, or I could just say, from someone who's worked on it as a superintendent, my concern is, and I've heard some of the proposals to basically shift from property taxes to income, which I think is probably something we need to do, because the property, if you look around the country, most states can only rely on the property tax so much to fund education. But we have a spending problem too. I mean, and that's, just shifting the revenue source to something else, or so quote, simplifying the system isn't gonna, I worry about my own pocketbook, like what's
Right.
coming out of one versus the other. So I think we have to be careful about just shifting the funding without. But the issues of, who's at efficiency and who's doing well and who's not.
right, and I think
Yeah.
that comes into that merger thing.
Yeah.
That's where
Yeah.
some of us get concerned that,
And I think, the other, as someone who's worked in rural schools, the issue of, some places in, let's say, more urban, if there is such a thing as an urban area in Vermont, they're able to operate at efficiencies of scale. It's not that their management is necessarily able to leverage certain things better, it's just that they have more kids under one roof. And we have a lot of rural schools that unfortunately aren't able to replicate that, but are still very efficient.
Right.
And we have the opposite true, where people, because they're so interested in being low on their spending, are not actually spending enough, I would argue, in some of the rural places. So it's a hard thing to crack, but my impression is that policymakers are very interested in taking a whack at revising the funding system.
Do the local school budgets have as tough a time being passed as the MVU school budget does?
no.
Generally, no.
And it's probably pretty typical, I would say. It varies, but,
I mean, I don't know about other parts of the state,
Yeah.
but up here, the MVU school budget is famous for
yeah.
not being passed.
It really depends.
People aren't happy.
But I think union school districts are always more difficult to, get that. I mean, I can think of like one of my schools, Meadowy Community School, which is just it's a wonderful elementary school. It's one of the best in the state and so forth. It's a union school district. People are very supportive of the school, but it doesn't necessarily translate into strong budgetary support, so it always comes out like 10 votes, Okay?
Just a couple things.
right.
One, we talk about,
Still blows
we're the state,
Abuse costs.
we come up with the laws. And so I've talked to probably almost all of our representatives in the county.
Yeah.
And they all have the same, the ones I've talked to have said the same thing. This isn't what we were told this law was gonna be. We were told that towns like Franklin and stuff weren't gonna be effective because we were big enough and we had, the cost per pupil, it wasn't gonna affect us. And now they're upset. They're
Sure.
like, this got passed and this isn't what we intended. And my other point was, you talked about school board members. Has there been a lot of turnover? There's been more lately, and it's from the stress of this bill.
Sure.
It's, I feel for the school board members. It's been a lot on their plate because they're trying to deal with all the stuff that the state is throwing on them. And then they've got the community behind them that is upset at what's happening. They're not upset with the school board, but they're upset with, so they're trying to negotiate both sides of this. And it's a lot of stress.
Yeah, school board members have been.
You're still
He's only
maintaining your own
28.
local.
Yeah, I missed that one.
I said he's only 28.
No, it's, because we have a local control system, the heavy lifting has fallen to school board members on us for sure. It's hard.
I was
And
up
we
for a
have
long
staffs
time.
under a lot
I
of
was
fatigue.
on for 7 years and I've been
They
on
take
for
a
a
lot of
long
heat.
time. Got rid of God, basically,
You know,
because
it
it's a
comes back
challenge.
to, a lot of the people say they don't have time for this, and they rely on us to do
Right.
it for them.
Absolutely.
So when we hear the public talk to us,
Yeah.
we're trying to do our job.
And that's
So we
why-
don't get
that's why I
undercut
reached out to the
later and
governor,
say, "You
that's
didn't do
why-
enough."
Yeah.
You know?
We had this meeting.
That's our fear. It really is. We're trying to speak for the whole community, as well as the other towns.
And I understand your hands are kind of tied because it is law.
Yeah, and I could, like I said, I could just advise you what I see as your options at
Yeah,
this point.
right,
And that's, I
right.
think, the best I can do for you. It's just, we can have a debate about it, and I hear what you're saying, but, if you need specific help on, what your options are, but, time is of the essence either way.
And how to handle our options.
That's right.
That's the biggest thing
Yep.
that between the select board, hopefully, and our school board, that we
I'd say
can
the first thing is
communicate
protect
strongly
assets.
together and make that happen before. That's our fear, and what we really need to do.
Absolutely.
We spoke about having the land, some of the land,
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
that,
So,
that's a big thing for us.
Secretary, just trying to get back in my head about planning. The report came out, the state board is taking testimony on it.
Right.
Will the state board basically ratify that plan or amend that plan? Because I think what he said is very, very interesting to me. If they're forced to merge, will they have a say in how they're merged?
Yeah, I didn't get to that. That's a great question. So I can almost guarantee they are not going to ratify the plan.
The plan as it was.
They're not going to ratify it. They're getting organized to figure out a way how to process all the political input that they've heard. Okay? So that's what I say, that you still have an opportunity to influence that deliberation. Just to the mechanics of how it's going to happen. So the state board has until November 30th to publish the final plan. When they do that, they also have to issue draft articles of agreement. So there's a different, I talked about 706 being the old process. There's a different process that's going to be invoked. We've never done it before under this scenario. So those state board draft articles of agreement are going to be basically sent to these districts that are forced to merge under the statewide plan. And then there's a local process. You have, I believe, 90 days to amend those articles. Okay, so you can still tweak them. The draft articles might be on our website tonight. They were supposed to come out last week, but I hadn't, I was new and I wanted to read them. I did so over the weekend, we've tweaked it a little bit. So they should be out either tonight or tomorrow, so you might want to check the agency website for that. But if you are forced or labeled as being forced to merge under the final statewide plan, which is not going to be just a ratification of what the secretary had proposed, you'll have 90 days locally to come up with an alternative version of that. And then the state board would then look at what you're proposing as an alternative and sign off on it or not.
But that alternative would have to be the three communities, in our case, Swan, they would all have to agree on what that is.
That's correct. You're going to have to come together with your neighbors as required by the law and come to consensus on what that would
See,
be.
that's what puts us in such a jam, because Swan can dictate however they put this board together.
Well, that's maybe something we can come up and help you with. Whether it be through facilitation or whatever. I facilitate those kinds of meetings, and I'd say that's not fair. And whether you agree to merge or not, I think you need to be able to go through the process and figure out the pros and cons of what you're doing, and then walk away from it and say it's not going to work.
But would a vote of a hypothetical district with Franklin, Swanton, and Highgate be a commingled vote, or would you have to have all three towns ratify it, or could Swanton and Highgate ratify it and Franklin be an orphan? I mean,
so
it wouldn't necessarily be
approving the final
Yes.
articles. Yeah, so this is going to be a different process under this part, because basically the state board is saying you're going to merge. You have a 90-day window of opportunity to articulate basically your rules of how you're going to work together, and then we're going to sign off on that. We're going to give you some default ones to consider. That's what's coming out on the website as a template, and feel free to have that conversation locally, 90 days to tweak it, and present back to us if you want to make some changes. So this is where you'd be able to include additional language about protecting the school closure, those kinds of things.
Would you say that the old process gives the communities more flexibility than the new process, or are they not the same?
Yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily more. Yeah, certainly more flexibility, but basically all you have is a very brief template and a law to start from. Now you have a more elaborate template, but it's the 706 process is much more involved in series of public. You have this committee that basically. The merger committee is beyond the authority of the school board. School boards appoint people to that, but it becomes its own public body and does its work or not, and determines whether it's advisable to merge or not, and then puts that out to the districts for a warning. So all that elaborate, that can take like months. I've done, like I said, I did an expedited process. It took us 3 months, I think, for one. But this is going to be a different kind of process. So you're going to be given sort of a starter kit of how to do it, and then you have an opportunity, I believe it's 90 days to amend those articles.
So if the member communities wanted to try to influence the state board and hold out for either, some sort of alternative governance structure that comes out of the final plan, or, the board says, okay, you guys are fine, they wouldn't lose any of the protections that we've discussed tonight regarding assets, regarding board membership, if they were to be forced to merge and then have to go through that draft process.
Yeah,
I want to make sure that if they think the best thing to do is hold out, that they're not losing any protections under the old process that they might, or if they were to go through a forced merger process.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing to do is to look at those draft articles when they come out in the next 48 hours and then make that assessment.
Okay.
But yeah, the way I look at the draft articles, they're trying to anticipate most scenarios, and they're trying to particularly embed some protections for small schools to make that easier to do in the template. But you'd want to make that comparison because under the law, you still have the old process available to you through June 30, 2019.
Okay.
So the state board, once again, would love to have you go through that, so they could pull you from the statewide mandated statewide plan.
Got it.
With the forced merger part.
Does AOE still have the last word?
The state board has the last word. The AOE's work is essentially done. The secretary's role was to produce a draft document, and now the state board's taking testimony on that, but then the state board has the authority to finalize that.
Unless there was some sort of legislative action.
And that's sort of the different.
I mean, the original version of Act 46, which passed the Senate, had the legislature having the final say.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the board, it was the legislators passing the final plan. It came out of both education committees, and I think when that came out, it took a lot of that control away.
Yeah. So that's what I interpret Dustin's comment. I mean, there's other things available to you. I think what I could offer for you is just what the current context is, but certainly changing the law, ultimately. And I know folks are considering, what's next for this, but.
Any more questions?
Thank you for your time.
Yeah,
No,
thank you.
so.
Appreciate you coming in.
Yeah,
No problem.
we,
Hope you can bring back our sentiment
Yeah,
to
it's
the
good for me to
governor
get to
and-
know you a little bit. Honestly, this is an area of the state I haven't spent as much time with in this kind of setting. I've spent a lot of time with boards in other areas of the state, so I'm happy to do that and get to know you guys a little bit and what your interests and needs are. I'd like to tour your schools a little bit more too, if I had more time. So if you want to talk to your leaders locally and invite me to come up, I'd love to walk through and get a sense of Highgate and the buildings. In high school.
Chris is our chair of the Highgate Elementary,
Yeah.
so
I talked to your superintendent, I know her, so just have her contact me and invite me. I'd love to come up and tour. Get to meet your kids.
and we thank you very much. You
No problem.
gave us a lot more information than we've been given,
Okay.
and really
still a lot of work to do.
a lot to think about and a lot
Yeah,
to,
reach out if I can get any help. I'd be happy to.
I appreciate that a
facilitate
lot.
something or, put some resources on to help you.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, that's fantastic. We wish you all the best of luck in your new position, and hopefully we'll all find a happy
Good luck to you all.
happy medium
Good
to,
luck. It's not easy.
Yeah, we do.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we appreciate it very much.
Thank you.